Do medieval dungeons have supply closets? Hi, I'm Sarah. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be choosing 5 books to read off of TikTok. So most of you probably have heard of TikTok. If you're like me, maybe you discovered it while in the throes of quarantine with just like nothing else to do, and maybe your younger sister sitting next to you scrolling through it all the time. A lot of you are probably not aware that there is a book side of TikTok, and I recently discovered this myself. Today I'm going to pick the first 5 books that are recommended to me, and I'm going to read them and tell you guys what I think. So starting off, Book Talk, if you will, leans very, very heavily to YA fantasy, which is not quite my thing. If I were to just go into TikTok and search for books or search for Book Talk, I guarantee I would end up with 5 young adult fantasy books. Instead of just going to the most popular Book Talk videos, I'm actually going to go to my For You page and scroll and see what the first 5 books are that are actually recommended to me. I'm going to use 5 different videos, and I'm going to read the first book selected to me in each of those videos. Unless I've already read it, then I will do the second one. And I've kind of been trying to like tell TikTok, yes, I like books. I'm a millennial. Please recommend me not young adult fantasy. So we'll see how it goes. TJ Maxx. Makeup. Ooh, baby raccoon. Oh no. It's Midnight Sun. Oh, I did not think about this. Oh, I'm gonna have to read Midnight Sun. All right, book number 1, Midnight Sun by Stephanie Meyer. Oh, book, okay, Book Talk. Princess Academy by Shannon, Hale. This definitely looks like a middle grade. The point of this Book Talk was to show a book that you love but have never heard anyone else talk about. So my second book, Princess Academy. Okay, I'm honestly dreading that less than reading Midnight Sun, so I really did not consider that Midnight Sun had just come out and that would probably happen to me because I'm an idiot. Okay, books that will get you feeling hot. Okay, it's called From Blood and Ash by Jennifer L. Armentrout. I have never heard of this one. It definitely looks like fantasy. However, it says books that are guaranteed to get you hot. So that could be a bonus. All right, moving on. Okay, this is Twilight, but I've already read Twilight, so I'm not reading that. Okay, ooh, books I have thrown across the room because I was so upset. Let's see, what's the first one? It's definitely fantasy. It's called Kingsbane by Legrand. Okay, this looks like it is book 2 of the trilogy. So what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna find this one. I'm gonna find this and I'm gonna read the first one instead. This is the Imperium trilogy by Legrand. So that is 4. Let's see what number 5 is. And here's my 5th book. This is called Ember Queen by Sebastian. I am shocked that I did not end up with a single Sarah J. Maas book, but I'm not surprised that I'm pretty sure 4 out of the 5 are young adult fantasy. Well, I guess Midnight Sun is kinda, but 3 out of the 5 definitely look like they're like high fantasy, which is not for me. I have no idea how long this entire video is going to take me from start to finish because I have to actually read all of these books and then report back, and I don't want to do it. Why did I come up with this? TikTok, why did you do me dirty like this? I spent so much time trying to find videos that were not young adult fantasy, like that were books I would maybe actually want to read, and hearting them so that TikTok would maybe get a better idea of what I was about, but that just did not happen. So I guess I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna find these books and I'm gonna read them. So I'll update you guys soon. I haven't actually read any of the books yet, but I've had like a little time to kind of like process what I did to myself with this stupid idea and to kind of look up the books a little bit more. So I think I actually might start with the Princess Academy just because I was able to get it right away. And it honestly kind of sounds cute. This is it. From the description on Amazon, it kind of almost sounds like The Selection, but for a younger audience. This is about a girl who lives in this kingdom, and they're doing like a contest to pick who's gonna marry the prince. And every teenage girl in the realm has to go to this Princess Academy to learn how to be a princess. It doesn't sound that bad. My only concern is that Amazon says it's book 1 of 2. So I feel like I'm gonna read this first book probably pretty quickly because it's like middle grade. And then I'm probably gonna end up having to read the second one to find out. I almost said to find out if she becomes the princess, but like obviously she does, because otherwise like what would this book even be? But I think I might start there. I actually was able to get 3 of them on my Kindle right now. So the other one is Furyborn, and that is the first one of the Imperium trilogy by Claire Legrand. Amazon says it's an epic YA fantasy about 2 fiercely independent young women, centuries apart, who hold the power to save their world or doom it. I don't know, there's something about a Sun Queen, but there's also a Blood Queen. I don't know. I don't know. We might get to this one next, I'm not sure. It's never good for me when they start off with like a map. There's that one, Furyborn. And then, oh man, I'm just realizing this now. So Ember Queen, which I was able to get, this is actually the 3rd book in a trilogy. I was really hoping, all of these are series, I know, which is what happens with YA fantasy, but I was really hoping this one was like a standalone one, and it is not. So I guess this is the Ash Princess trilogy. So I'm actually gonna have to try and get the Ash Princess book. Theodosia, I only know how to say that because of Hamilton, was 6 when her country was invaded and her mother, the Fire Queen, was murdered before her eyes. There's a lot of queens in these books. On that day, the Kaiser took Theodosia's family, her land, and her name. Theo was crowned Ash Princess, a title of shame to bear in her new life as a prisoner. Then one night, the Kaiser forces her to do the unthinkable. She realizes that surviving is no longer enough, but she does have a weapon. Her mind is sharper than any sword, and power isn't always won on the battlefield. I don't know, so I guess she was a princess, and then like things were, and she was invaded, and now she's not a princess, but it's gonna be okay because she's smart. Okay, so I'm gonna have to see if that is available on the Libby app or not. The other 2 books, Midnight Sun and From Blood and Ash, I'm on waitlists for. And I'll probably, if I don't get through these before I get off the waitlist, then I will, I guess, purchase them. I'm really hoping not to have to purchase Midnight Sun because like I really just don't want to give Stephanie Meyer money for, from what I understand, is just a retelling of the Twilight book, which I think she already did by like retelling it as like a gender swap. So literally this is just like the 3rd time she has written this book, and I feel like she just does not deserve my money for that. Here we are. I'll tell you about the Princess Academy when I finish it. All right, so I have finished Princess Academy. It was not that bad. It was like 4 stars, I would say, for what it is, which is definitely a children's book. It's probably written for maybe like a 3rd, 4th grade level, something like that. It wasn't quite what I thought it was. I thought it was gonna be exactly like a little miniature ripoff of The Selection. And it's really more about the main character, Miri, like finding herself and finding her place in her town than winning the heart of a prince. So in this book, Miri is from this kind of isolated mountain town that is like a territory of the main kingdom. Every time like the new ruler is ready to get married, the priests make a prediction about what province the new princess is going to be from. And in this case, they were kind of like, I don't know, I think they were kind of like trolling the royal family, and they picked this like territory far away where all the people are kind of like uneducated and don't know how to read. That's where Miri lives. So they have to do this like really intensive Princess Academy where they're like teaching all the girls how to read, and again, like I enjoyed it. I thought it was good. I would say like for this type of book, what I would probably recommend instead of this would be like Ella Enchanted. I think was better. This was fine. It was cute enough, fine to read. Longer than I expected. Like the writing's very simple and young, so it didn't take me that long to get through it, but the actual page count was higher than I expected, so I thought I'd be able to blow through this one in a day, and it took me actually like 2 days of not as intensive reading as I could have done, but still. So that is finished. Book number 1 was fine. I don't think my life is changed from having read it, but it was fine. I have also started Furyborn. It's gonna be a bit of a challenge, I think, to get through all of these high fantasy books. Something I didn't really think about is how long these tend to be. Like, these young adult fantasy books are like thick. I was looking up the word count on some of them, and they're huge. Like, I remember how long Twilight was back in the day. Twilight was kind of a longer-ish book, and I looked it up, and Midnight Sun is literally twice as long as Twilight was. So, something to look forward to. So I've started Furyborn. I'm really not even far enough in it to really get an idea of what it's about, but it's gonna be fun. I'll get back to you when I'm finished that one. Okay? Alright, so I have finished Furyborn. Please don't mind how I look right now. I'm afraid this video is probably just going to be a series of videos of me looking progressively worse until, like, October. But anyway, I finished Furyborn. It took me a while, not because it was terrible, but just because it was quite long, and it's just not really a genre I love. So my motivation wasn't there like it might have been for something else. But essentially, there are 2 timelines in this story. The older timeline is a girl named Raelle, who has discovered she has this series of powers that makes everyone suspect she is this legendary Sun Queen. And then 1,000 years in the future, we have a girl, Eliana. I realized that, like, Eliana's story was a lot weaker, I think, because, like, there just wasn't that much. There was all sorts of stuff going on, but there wasn't really this, like, unifying thing to her story. Like, her mother went missing, and she's like this assassin. It almost kind of felt like a series of side quests, and not that much was put into the main quest. So that's kind of Eliana's story. I thought Raelle's was better, more intriguing, but at the same time almost less so, because you know what's going to happen to Raelle since the very beginning. There's like an intro that makes it very clear where Raelle is going to end up. So she's doing all these trials, and you know she passes them because, like, that's where she was in the beginning of the book. It didn't feel like there were 2 separate timelines 1,000 years apart. The present day versus 1,000 years ago was remarkably similar. In Raelle's time, there was people with magical powers, and by Eliana's time, they think that's all a myth and a legend, but there's really no other differences. Technology is pretty much all the same. The way everybody speaks and acts, it's just all kind of the same. So it just feels, it doesn't feel like there's 1,000 years separating these 2 stories and these 2 timelines. So it just makes it seem unnecessary that it was such a large amount of time. The writing is where this one just really kind of fell flat for me. Like, the story's okay, it's fine. The writing reads like almost like a Harlequin romance, kind of? Or fan fiction, I guess. Like, good fan fiction. But for, like, a book, it's a little lower level, in my opinion. There's all these cliches, and you can almost come up with you almost know the words they're gonna use, like the phrasing and everything. Except it's not just like that's for the romance scenes, that's the whole book. And I was also disappointed because the intro scene that I talked about before, I thought that by the end of this book, we would get there with the characters, and we didn't. So it's like, it's clearly like there's one big long story and they just kind of randomly hacked it into thirds. It's not like this book doesn't have a complete arc on its own. It literally just, like, ends, and it's like by the next book. And you're like, oh, okay. In contrast, The Princess Academy, that one actually is also a trilogy, but that first book is, like, it stands alone very well. It's a complete story. You don't have to continue that trilogy to feel satisfied with the story that was in that first book. Whereas this one, it just ends. Although there was one funny thing. I was like 80% of the way through the book. Eliana is in this, like, dungeon, prison type thing. And I'm picturing this, like, medieval type dungeon, you know? And she, like, escapes, and she's hiding in a supply closet. And I'm like, do medieval dungeons have supply closets? Like, I'm like picturing one of those yellow like mop buckets. And then she starts talking about the buzzing overhead lights, and I'm like, is there electricity? Am I 80% of the way through this book and I'm just now like, wait, there's electricity? And then like 2 pages later, she's like, oh, what were those buzzing lights? Another character is like, oh, this guy's experimenting. So I guess there is electricity, but it wasn't elsewhere in the book. And I don't know, because this is a trilogy, I don't know if that pays off later, but there's just no other mention of it. So there's just like this little 3-page sequence where there's electrical lights for no fucking reason. Everything else was pretty much like what I expected. It was fine. It was like 2 stars. I just wish it wasn't so fucking long. That's it. I'm gonna start the other one, the Jennifer Armentrout, the one that's supposed to get me hot, from Ashen something, I don't remember. I actually started the first couple pages, but whatever, I'll get to that one. I'm probably not gonna have a ton of extra time to read, so that won't matter to you because the way this video is edited, it's just gonna pop to the next scene like nothing happened. All right, so it turns out that in an unexpected twist, I was too hard on Furyborn. And looking back, I feel a little nostalgic for the days when that was the worst thing that I had read due to this challenge, because let me tell you, Furyborn was a fucking delight compared to this steaming pile of trash. It's hard for me to explain the plot of From Blood and Ash because there was not one. The things that were happening, sort of, are that the main character, I think it's pronounced Penelope, like Penelope, but not because it's a fantasy book. Penelope is the maiden, and we are never really told what the maiden is or exactly why she is the maiden or how she came to be the maiden, but as the maiden she's forced to live this life of, we'll call it isolation, and she has to wear this veil so no one sees her face, and she wears all white gowns, of course. The book opens with her like sneaking out into basically like a brothel, I guess, to play cards or whatever. She meets this guy Hawk and they have like this kiss in this exchange, and it's clear he's gonna be the love interest, and then he just disappears for, I don't know, hundreds of pages. He barely is in it. So later in the book he gets promoted to being her bodyguard, which doesn't make any fucking sense, because if you've got this maiden you're trying to keep pure or whatever, like why would you pick the youngest, hottest candidate to be her personal bodyguard? But whatever. And I thought this was gonna be like this like really slow burn, forbidden love type of steamy romance. Like there's just no torture to it. Like he's very obvious that he wants her and doesn't care about her being the maiden, and she really doesn't seem to care that much either. So there's just like, it's not what I thought it would be in that regard. And then as for the fantasy world, it's like never well explained, but there's bad guys called the Atlanteans from Atlantia, not Atlantis. Like I was picturing like Aquaman for a while, but they're actually like these long-living vampire type creatures that drink blood. However, the good guys are these ascended people that also, although they don't drink blood, spoiler, they do, are also very long living and they don't age. And then there's also these craven things, which are like vampire zombies, maybe just zombies, I don't even know. And they live beyond the wall in a mist, because of course there's a mist. And then there's also wolvens, which are werewolves, which are mentioned early on, but they're like, oh, well, wolvens are all extinct. And then of course wolvens pop up at the end of the book, whatever. There's just all these weird little parts, and none of it really comes together until the very, very end. And if you're thinking like, oh, this sounds like it could be kind of interesting or whatever, like it could be, except that like nothing happens in this book. There's just no driving plot to the whole thing except her and Hawk. I'll call it flirting, but it's so bad and cringy, and That is the worst part of this book. Everything sounds like it's teenagers in like 2004 and like young teenagers. Everybody's talking like they're very young, reasonably modern teenagers, and it's painful. There are so many like long ellipses and pauses. It is so much. Like let me show you this screenshot. Like what is this? Like everyone's saying like whatever and shut up, and it's the fucking cringiest thing I have ever seen. There's like this evil duke who has an evil friend that's a lord, and they're clearly supposed to be like these big ominous villains, but they're just not in it that much. And at some point there's like this really big attack on the palace, and her father figure bodyguard that she's really attached to dies, and she kills this evil lord guy in retaliation, even though he had nothing to do with it, or at least not directly, or at least not as far as she knew. She just gets mad and like hacks him to pieces with a sword, and it's just really, I guess it's supposed to be her dark moment or whatever. It's just really out of place because like, yeah, he was evil or whatnot, but like she barely ever interacted with him, so it's just really random. So after this big attack on the palace, they decide they're gonna move the maiden to a more secure location. A hawk, obviously, and then some other guards are taking her there. It turns out Hawk has all along been not only an Atlantean, but the evil Prince Atlantean, referred to as the Dark One. He's been orchestrating this whole thing the whole time to get Penelope away so he can kidnap her and then use her as ransom. She's like really mad about it and tries to kill him to the point of like stabbing him through the heart, but then literally like 2 pages later she's over it and they're fucking again. The sex scenes were actually not terrible, but there's only like 3 of them that are like 2 to 3 pages each in this whole insanely long book. I do not hate the ideas behind this book. I do not hate the idea of this fantasy setting and this bodyguard protecting a sacred maiden for whatever reason. Like, I just don't think there are any skilled enough authors that write this particular thing, which means that if you want to read this particular thing, this is what you have to read. 1 star, would not recommend. I'm taking a bit of a break because Midnight Sun is not available for me yet on the library app. I just cannot even handle the thought of reading Ash Princess right now, so I'm just taking a little bit of a mental break, but we're gonna get there. We're gonna get through this. I'm gonna do it. Bye. Ash Princess was surprisingly not awful. This was the one I was probably the most concerned about because the description on Amazon and Goodreads and everything is just not good. It's about this girl named Theodosia, and when she was a child, her mother was queen of a country called Astria, ruled only by queens, and they're all descended from like the fire god. When Theodosia was 6 years old, their country was invaded by the Calavaxians, I think it was, and they're basically this country, kind of like Vikings almost, where their country was destroyed. And so they basically move to these other countries and invade them and take them over, deplete all the resources, and then move on to another one. So the Calavaxians come in, they kill Theodosia's mother, take over, basically enslave all of the Astrians, and set themselves up as the rulers. And Calavaxia is ruled by this guy called the Kaiser, which I guess is like the king. And for whatever reason, he keeps Theodosia alive and dresses her up and parades her around and whips her to show how superior he is and how he's taking control of the country. And that's kind of the main part that doesn't really make any sense. It's made clear multiple times that, like, in order for all hope to be lost for the Astrians, Theodosia would have to be dead. Like, she's the last hope because she's the only person that can rule, because this country and these people are only ruled by these descendants of the fire god. So like it makes zero sense that she's kept alive. They kind of try to make it the plot where like the Kaiser wants to marry her to establish some legitimacy over the country, but it's also implied that he's planning to move on from the country because the resources are almost gone. It just doesn't it just doesn't make sense. Like, not only is he keeping her alive, but he's also like dressing her up in gowns and stuff and putting this like crown of ashes on her head at every big ball or party that she does attend in an expensive dress, but is supposed to be humiliated because also there's this like crown of ash raining down on her. She talks about how it gets all over her and ruins her dresses, and you gotta wonder why the Kaiser is like funding all of this. Her dress bill must be through the roof if she is just ruining custom ball gowns left and right. Like, there's like a ball gown quota, I think, for these fantasy books. Well, like, logically it doesn't make any sense at all why he would be calling her Ash Princess, as though that's supposed to be an insult. He's just like reminding everybody that she is the princess and she is alive. And theoretically she could take back her country. But that's really the weakest part of it. Like, for the most part, the world building's pretty good. This country and its magic and some of its customs and stuff are pretty well developed, and it's not unpleasant to read. It definitely follows that trope of Theodosia regularly getting beat to shit for whatever reason. Like, the Kaiser likes to just take her out and whip her publicly. But it does still make more sense than in the last book, where it was being done privately just for no reason. It's just better done. Like, there's nothing particularly unique or groundbreaking in this book, but the story more or less makes sense, and it was fine to read, and it was just fine. I did like this part where Theodosia is trying to seduce the Kaiser's son, and initially she is just like really like she's working it, you know? It's kind of fun. Initially, she really has no romantic interest in him. And of course that changes, and I think it changes a little quick, but I really appreciated the early moments of her using her femininity, and she can tell he's into her, and they even talk about how like the reason he's into her is because he could never have her. And I think they could have explored that more, but I really do like how they put that out there. Like, it wasn't just that she was so special and amazing that of course everyone was in love with her. They gave like a really specific logical reason for him to be into her, and I really appreciated that. I might finish the series. I might. I've been thinking about it. Not right now because I need a break from fantasy, but at some point I might actually finish the series. It wasn't bad. I kind of am interested to see how it ends and to see which of the two love interests she actually ends up with. I feel like it's one where it's not immediately obvious just from having read the first book. So I give Ash Princess 3 stars. But with all good things, there must be some dark clouds. I have started Midnight Sun. Prepare for the next time you see me for there to be a really long rant about Midnight Sun. I have finished Midnight Sun, and it was terrible. It was worse than I ever thought it was going to be. I don't want to hate on anyone for liking Twilight. I can see the appeal to that story, but I can't imagine this book was what the fans actually wanted from Stephanie Meyer. So in case you're unaware, Midnight Sun is the retelling of Twilight book, but from Edward's perspective. Edward is the vampire half of the couple. And you know, I actually thought this could have been interesting, and it could have been if someone else had written it maybe. Edward's a 100-year-old vampire, 100 plus, I'm not sure. But this book starts, it opens as soon as he meets Bella. We get no backstory. We get nothing from Edward about who he is or how he came to be a vampire, who his family is or what they mean to him. Nothing. It opens, he's a vampire, he's sitting in a cafeteria, he sees Bella for the first time. That is where Edward's story begins, because let's face it, Edward was never about being a personality or a vampire or anything. He was just about being this perfect, beautiful boyfriend for Bella / Stephanie Meyer to fall in love with and have adore her. Because this story bothered to be told from Edward's point of view, I thought it would be Edward's story. But it's not. It's literally just a redo of every single scene from Twilight, but it's swapped to Edward's perspective, which is just not fucking interesting because it's all him just describing every time Bella blushes, describing how perfect her skin is, describing her perfect thick hair, how beautiful she is, every time she fucking bites her lower lip. And it's kind of creepy as fuck if you're listening to the audiobook, which I did for a lot of this just to get through it on my commute. The audiobook's narrated by a guy. His voice is good, and he does a pretty good job reading this, but he's clearly not a 17-year-old by, like, a lot. And I guess it makes sense to have Edward's voice be kind of older because Edward is in his hundreds, but listening to him describe Bella is, it's kind of gross. It was an interesting choice given the content of this book, which is basically just a 100-year-old vampire just like salivating over Bella all the time. And it's so long. And there is very little added to the Twilight world from this book. Even scenes that Edward is not actually there for, that you would think you could just read it in Twilight, even when he's not there at all, he's reading someone else's mind to spy on Bella that way. So like Bella's off in a different classroom talking to Jessica, and this is a conversation that already happened in Twilight, so we already know about it. Edward is still fucking spying on her. So we're still getting a rehash of this scene, and it's completely unnecessary. Most of the time adds nothing to the plot. And also, if you read Twilight, it's in there. Edward is constantly talking about how unique and smart and different from everyone else and all the other humans Bella is for basic ass stuff. Like, Bella walks out into some rain and lifts her face to the rain, and Edward talks about how different that is to see because none of the other girls would ever do that because they're all wearing makeup. And of course Bella doesn't need to wear makeup because she has perfect flawless skin that any woman would die to have. Yes, this is actually how Edward describes this. And it's just so fucking ridiculous because one, not all teenage girls wear makeup. Two, even if they did, there's nothing fucking wrong with that. And three, it's dumb as fuck to have Bella walking out into the rain and lifting her face up into it when like 2 pages before she was just talking to Edward about how much she hates the cold and rain. God, I fucking hate this book. I hated it. And I hate Edward. Edward is extremely boring and pretentious, and so much of this book is just Edward's inner monologue, which is just him obsessing over how much he wants Bella and also hating himself for how much he wants Bella and how unfair it is to Bella and how he wants her to live a normal life but he can't get away from her, and how he's going to be the death of her but he can't leave her because he loves her so much. There's so many plot holes in Twilight, most caused by the fact that Alice can see the future. And I think Stephanie Meyers is kind of trying to address some of these in Midnight Sun. Anything your characters ever do that results in something stupid, there's going to be the plot hole of why didn't Alice tell them not to do that? And she bends herself over backwards trying to explain some of this in this book. Once the bad guy of the story actually does show up, which by the way doesn't even happen until 75% of the way through, every fucking dumb choice they made, Alice should have seen. She should have seen that the vampires would show up at the baseball game. There's no good explanation for why she didn't. And once they're trying to figure out how to get away from the vampires, she should have seen Bella make her stupid ass decision to sacrifice herself and all the other stuff she did that caused problems. Like, Alice would have seen all of this. Sometimes her visions work perfectly, you know, when Stephanie Meyers just wants to like wave away certain plot points, and then other times they're not working and it's not, there's no explanation for it, or there is, but it's so convoluted it makes no sense. So we get this entire enormous book of her trying to justify how they still get surprised even though Alice sees the future all the time, and how they make wrong choices even though Alice can see the future. As soon as Edward sees Bella and is just so crazy attracted to her blood and wants to kill her, and he's thinking about killing the entire room full of students and a teacher in order to kill her, obviously he would just need to leave. And he goes off for a week or so to think about things, and him coming back is just the hugest plot hole of the whole thing. It's just annoying that Edward is both talking about how insane this bloodthirst is and how he could never overcome it, but at the same time, like, he comes back because he's like, oh yeah, I can overcome it, it's fine. I don't want to move my family, it'd be an inconvenience. It's so fucking stupid to read when you know that in the next book they all pick up and leave anyway because Bella gets a paper cut, so whatever. Once Edward actually has fallen in love with Bella and Bella with him, he thinks about leaving again, and Alice has these visions where she sees that Edward's stain will only result in Bella either becoming a vampire or Edward killing her. And Edward is adamant that neither of these two futures is acceptable, and he will do anything to avoid them both. And he says he will leave. He gets excused, basically, by Alice saying that that won't work, that he won't be able to stay away from Bella and he'll come back no matter what. And that's so problematic for so many reasons. Like, one, everything Edward does afterwards is justified because we already know he has to. He loves Bella so much he can't stay away. It's not his fault. And two, because again, in the next book, he leaves. And by the end of this book, he's determined he's going to leave. And it just makes no sense because Alice already told you can't leave, right? And Alice's visions are never wrong, except he accepts them as truth, even though she misses shit all the time. Alice's visions are problematic. Obviously, I don't really like Twilight. I have a lot of problems with that overall story, but there are things this book could have done that would have at least justified this book existing. And that is, Stephenie Meyers could have talked more about Edward's life before Bella. He was alive for decades as a vampire, and there's only a few brief stories from that. And most of them are retellings of stories we already knew. There's so much she could have done. I think probably the best way would have been to have like a parallel where there's like a story from Edward's past interlaced with the chapters from his point of view of Twilight, where, you know, things are kind of parallel. Maybe Edward had some kind of romance before, or thought he might, or just some story that kind of lines up so that you're not just redoing every single scene from Twilight in this excruciating detail. But instead, that's what we got. And it was so fucking long. I don't listen to audiobooks. I had to, because this was such a time suck. I was already commuting for something, so I'm listening to it on 1.3 times speed, because at normal speed, the audiobook is 25 fucking hours. Every day I'm listening to this in the shower and in the car, just to kind of try and get through it without taking up too much of my life. I put a lot of thought into the book that Stephenie Meyers should have written. It's Jacob-centered. And let me tell you why. I do not think there's any amount of money that a movie studio could offer that could get Kristen Stewart and Robert Pattinson back into a Twilight movie together, both because they're exes and both because they've both been reasonably successful outside of Twilight and kind of made it clear they did not like Twilight and they don't like that their careers are so defined by Twilight. And also Robert Pattinson's now Batman. Don't write a future Twilight sequel with those two. Write it about Jacob and Renesmee. Obviously, I have a shit ton of problems with Jacob and Renesmee as a couple and a unit and as a creepiness, but for the sake of making a fucking movie, Taylor Lautner's not doing shit. And I was under the impression that he had gotten fat because probably I saw like a unflattering picture once upon a time. However, I found his Instagram and he still looks pretty fucking good. Given that he's not acting, I assume he's just keeping himself in decent shape, sitting around waiting for the day that Stephenie Meyers does in fact write the fucking Jacob sequel to Twilight that we're all sitting here waiting for, and he gets a call. They could do this easily. Again, Taylor Lautner's not doing shit, so he's gonna be cheap as fuck, and you can recast Renesmee as anybody you fucking want, and you should. Please do not use the actual child from Breaking Dawn Part 2. Even, I don't care how old she is now, that's just, no, it's creepy. Don't do it. But Stephenie Meyers, if you're fucking watching this and you write what is sure to be the train wreck book of the century about Jacob and Renesmee continuing their adventures / romance, I will read it with horrified faces the entire time, and I'll fucking buy a movie ticket and I will watch the glorious awfulness that will be, and I will be 1,000 times happier than I was reading Midnight Sun. Midnight Sun, 1 star, do not recommend. All right, so that's it. I am done with this challenge. It took me, I think, almost 2 months. It usually does not take me that long to read 5 books, but 3 of these were fucking huge and none of them were anything I wanted to read. And I'm gonna be more careful in the future before doing a challenge such as this, because clearly TikTok does not know what I want to read. I did not actually start this challenge with the idea that I would not really like any of the books. I thought I would have to read at least one young adult fantasy, but I really thought I'd programmed TikTok well enough to kind of steer it towards my taste better. And maybe I would actually discover a book I actually really liked, and that just did not happen. I really underestimated exactly how crazy about young adult fantasy TikTok actually is. TikTok itself has started to realize this, and there's a lot of videos of people talking about how Book Talk only talks about the same few books. Back when I first filmed this video and selected these books, it was all fantasy, and I did not think I would actually get 2 1-star books out of this. It might not seem that way, but I actually don't give many books 1 star. Most books, if I see something in them that was good or made the reading experience different for me or special in some way, I'm not going to give it 1 star. I'm going to give it 2 stars. But yeah, 2 of these were just bad. My favorite was Princess Academy, followed by Ash Princess, which is the only one I actually think I might at some point read the sequels to. Then Furyborn, which was fine, but just not really for me. And then I don't know which was worse, Midnight Sun or From Blood and Ash. They were both terrible. I really can't. I would think From Blood and Ash, just because at least I didn't know what was going to happen in that plot, which might have, you would think, might give it a little more interest for me than Midnight Sun. But the plot was so nonsensical and just all over the place that it didn't. Yeah, they were really bad. This was a bad challenge. I really messed up on this one. In conclusion, I would not recommend TikTok for book recommendations. I'm gonna stick to BookTube, where there's at least a few people that don't like YA fantasy or don't exclusively read YA fantasy, because good God, did I mess up with this challenge. See you next time.